tuning into another episode of Reverse Ambition, a podcast that features those who took a leap of faith to follow their dreams and passions. I'm your host, Kelsey Cooper, aka The Social Broker, and today I will be rapping with my good friend Cherae Robinson, who is an entrepreneur, a DJ, a modern Pan-Africanist, who is a founder and CEO of TasteMakers Africa, an experienced marketplace connecting curious travelers to local insiders in African cities. Welcome, Cherae. What up, girl?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. You in the States, right?
Yes, I am in New York at the moment.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me on Reverse Ambition. I think of your journey as the perfect example of those who took a leap of faith. You probably take a multiple leaps of faith in terms of chasing your dreams and passions, and we want to go into that. So, take me through your journey from where did you go to school?
So I went to Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Studied biology and had an amazing college experience, pledged, student government president, did the whole nine.
Student government president? Wow, okay.
Yeah. So I started, that's what I studied, and I think junior year realized that I didn't want to be a doctor.
Oh, wow.
I was, you're trying to do internships and be a serious person by the time you're a junior. And so I remember shadowing a physician over a summer at an emergency room. So she was a attending physician in a trauma center. And I remember some person came in, I think they were having like a drug overdose or something crazy, and they had to put a trach in their skull. And I was like, yep, never doing anything like this. And it's funny, it didn't occur to me that, like, clearly I don't have to be a trauma physician. But in my head, I was just like, I don't have the, like, emotional dexterity required to be a physician. This actually isn't going to work. So then I had to figure out what I wanted to do with this biology degree. And so by that point, I'd done some research at the University of Maryland. And I realized that my favorite part of doing my research was actually the part where I got to like analyze and present my work, but I hated like having to go to the lab every day and like check my petri dishes and cell cultures. Like I didn't like that part. So what I did know is that travel needed to be a part of whatever life I wanted. I mean, history was actually my favorite class, and history sort of inspired me to want to see the world and sort of escape the one I was in, at least from when I was younger.
Right.
And so I was like, how do I sort of merge this biology degree, because I'm not about to like change my major at this point, with this sort of global ambition. And so did a bunch of research and realized that international development was probably the best place for me to land. So by the time I was in senior year, I was actively looking at, global humanitarian organizations, wanting to become an ambassador or foreign service officer, and really sort of aligning myself with careers that would blend my science degree and my kind of global interests.
Right. This was your senior year
of college. Yep.
Wow. Very ambitious. That's a good pivot in terms of from wanting to be a doctor all 3 years in college to now that I want to travel and be a global ambassador per se. Were you nervous? Were you scared about, when you graduate and trying to figure that out?
No, my experience, I was lucky in many respects. Even when I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to travel. So like my whole purpose of being a doctor was to eventually go work for Medicine Sans Frontiers, MSF.
Oh, okay.
So like I already so even in being a doctor, like my goal was to like get enough practice under my belt so I could go work for MSF.
Right.
So that was always sort of how I wanted to live. And then I think I lucked out because I had an internship my senior year at AARP, interestingly enough. They had a global health division.
Mm-hmm.
And so global health was really my focus once I was like, okay, combining interests. And so I was interning at AARP in the global health division. And much of that work was actually policy stuff. So I was using sort of my science and research brain, but applying it to policy. But I also at the same time was like learning like literal like hosting diplomacy skills. I had this Iranian boss who had an African-American husband and this like really awesome sort of direct supervisor. And they were just really committed to me. Like I was the youngest intern. I was the only intern in the office that wasn't in a master's degree program. And my
how old were you? Like this is like your senior year, of course. You were like...
Yeah, so I'm like 21, 22.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's 2021, something like that.
Right.
And so I was fortunate. Like they basically like were trying to teach me everything and expose me to everything. I mean, everything from like, okay, we're hosting the German ambassador tonight, Cherae, you're ordering the wine. So in order to order the wine in this setting, you need to know these things. You need to be able to do this, drink red wine at business dinners because otherwise.
This is at 20.
Yeah, I was 20 years old.
Wow.
So these people were like pouring into me that way. And so when it was time for me to graduate, they were like, look, we don't want you like struggling to find a job. So they ended up offering me a full-time job. Like, so I never went through the like graduate and where am I going to work thing. Like I just worked at my internship. So they converted me to a full-time employee and I worked there for a year after graduation.
What was your position?
I was some made-up job that they made.
They love you that much. They created a job for you.
Yeah, they basically just like I mean, it wasn't a job that they were like advertising. It was like, what was it? Like staff. I'm trying to remember what the title was. It was like, I don't even remember, but it wasn't like an admin role. Mm-hmm. It was like team something. Like I can't remember, but it was like a job that they literally made up.
Wow, because they love you so much.
Yeah.
Wow. So okay. So you say you stayed here for a year.
Mhm.
How was that experience? You know, what did you in that? You're not an intern anymore. You were a job. So what were you exposed to in terms of within that year?
I mean, it was basically like my internship on steroids. I met Hillary Clinton, which was dope. Like meeting Hillary was like a big thing.
Oh, Hillary
for me.
Clinton.
So I met her. I mean, a lot of my work was like being support for the team, writing briefs, doing research. I mean, at the time, President Bush was, in his administration, was looking at Medicare Part D.
Okay.
And so what I was doing was like getting global examples of good healthcare policy, good health practice, well-being practice for the 50-plus population. And so I was looking at what was Denmark doing, what is Germany doing, what is Australia doing, and really sort of researching those programs and then producing research reports and papers that would back our policy positions at AARP with international sort of competencies. So a lot of my work was around that. And then, a part of that work we were doing at AARP was going beyond sort of the research and actually bringing, the Minister of Health from Denmark over to the U.S. to meet with policymakers. And so I also got to do a lot of like congressional briefings and stuff like that. So I got really, really exposed to sort of how the government works, how foreign policy works, how these things intersect. And so that's kind of back and forth to the Hill. AARP positioned our internship as like a Capitol Hill internship. Mm-hmm. So we're also very much connected to the world of like Hill staffers and stuff like that. And I considered actually going and working for a congressman while I was there. But I realized at the time that like policy wasn't necessarily like my deepest passion.
Right.
So
travel is, right?
I was doing global work, even though I wasn't traveling yet. And I mean, travel is, for me, not necessarily a passion. It's a way of being that I like. So it's not so much like I'm passionate about travel. It's more that I believe that travel is an important, like, part of my well-being, part of my, like, learning process and things like that.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, it was, I wanted to kind of, AARP was limiting in that I was only exposed to sort of one issue, which is an important one, sort of what are we doing with our ever-increasing aging population. But I wanted to be sort of more hardcore global health, hardcore science. And so I was looking for other opportunities to do that. And so I eventually landed at the CDC, but working for a World Health Organization program. So I ended up moving to Atlanta to work on this WHO initiative that was led by the U.S. Center for Disease Control. So that was like more squarely global health, which is what I wanted to do. Right.
How long did you do that?
So I stayed there for almost 3 years.
Okay. Was that a rewarding experience? Was it in line with, the direction you wanted to go in career-wise?
It was great. I mean, I took my first ever trip out of the U.S.
Okay.
While I was at the CDC. I was working on foodborne disease, surveillance and capacity building in emerging economies, which was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Really had an amazing professional experience, was given sort of leadership opportunities that I would have never expected. I mean, at one point, I was leading a scientific or co-leading a scientific working group in Europe looking at burden of disease and some metrics around measuring that. And I mean, I was in Amsterdam all the time, working with colleagues in the Netherlands, working in Switzerland at WHO a lot, spent a lot of time in Geneva. But then I also got to do things like go to Guatemala and train epidemiologists and microbiologists on how to respond to a foodborne disease outbreak.
Wow.
And so I got to do, work on crafting that program, being support for senior scientists. I mean, I got to go to a castle in Switzerland. I mean, I just did incredible work.
Mm-hmm.
Work that in many ways was far beyond my sort of work experience, but a lot of the stuff I did at AARP enabled me to be comfortable among that level of talent.
Right.
So I never felt like intimidated by the fact that like most of my colleagues had like a gazillion PhDs and I just had a bachelor's degree.
Oh, so now you seem like your experiences now has been like global. So you were at the CDC in Atlanta doing all those things. And after that, you'd stayed there for 3 years. And after that, what did you do? Where did you go?
I moved to Chicago for a year, got pregnant, stayed there for a year, and
you had your son in Chicago?
Had my son in Chicago. Realized that Chicago was not for me. I mean, I took a job at a nonprofit in Chicago that was like looking at domestic violence. And I got like a super senior role because I had all this like crazy experience doing different things.
Right.
But, it was fulfilling in a very different way in that, my private life at the time was kind of in shambles. And I working for Wings, which was the domestic violence nonprofit I worked for in Chicago, literally was the community I needed for that time in my life.
Okay.
So I couldn't have managed that and some of the emotional things I was going through
privately in your private life.
Yeah, my private life was this sort of extremely. So I mean, I'm at a domestic violence nonprofit, so the level of empathy and compassion of the type of people that are going to work there. I mean, my boss Terry Channer was literally like a godsend to me during the year I was in Chicago. I mean, anything a boss could do to support you as an employee, like she did like 10 times that.
Okay.
So I was in Chicago for a year, but at the end of the day, once I had my son, I sort of went through a depression for much of the year after I had him. But somehow was like, all right, Cherae, like, we're not going to just like give up on all our dreams now. Like, we've got to figure it out.
Right.
So I knew that being globally centered was just a core part of my identity. And so I, started applying for jobs back in international development space, and eventually landed at CARE in Atlanta, which was like my dream global humanitarian organization to work for, because they were the only global org at that time that had an African-American female CEO.
Okay.
And I was like, I want to work there. And so I applied, and they called me for an interview. I went, I think I had 3 or 4 interviews, and they offered me the job. So I moved back to Atlanta.
Wow. With your son?
Yeah, with my son.
Okay. So single mom and taking on a new position. Back to your comfort zone, of course, Atlanta. Is that around the time where I met you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so CARE was, I think you were going to New Mexico a lot, right? Is it New Mexico?
No. So I met you after CARE.
Oh,
then.
Okay.
So yeah, I met you when I was living in Mexico, the country, like old Mexico.
Oh, and you used to visit Atlanta a lot.
Yeah, I used to visit Atlanta a lot.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I know. So when did you get the entrepreneurial bug?
Oh, it wasn't until probably 4 years after I moved back to Atlanta, because I actually maybe 7 years after that. I mean, I went to Atlanta. I stayed at CARE for 3 years, took my first trip to Africa while working for CARE with Sierra Leone. That was life-changing and amazing. Traveled all over the U.S. for CARE as well. And then had incredible experiences till this day. I mean, one of my mentors was my first boss at CARE. I mean, I ended up getting promoted at CARE and doing a bunch of cool stuff, and responded to the Haiti earthquake, and ended up on the board of Big Boy from Outkast, nonprofit board. I just lived a whole life in Atlanta, and it was great, but Atlanta felt super limiting to me, from a social perspective. It felt like, I don't know, this sounds kind of crass, but I always kind of felt like the smartest person in the room, because I had this very global perspective, and coming from New York and DC. And I just felt like, at least at that time, Atlanta has changed a lot. At that time, it felt like, everyone just wanted, a big old house in Southwest Atlanta and 2.5 kids in a sense. That just felt like what everybody's dream was, and that wasn't my thing.
Right.
So I just didn't fit. I felt like I didn't fit.
Right.
And so I was like, it's time for me to move abroad. I've dipped my toe in. I want an opportunity that takes me out of the U.S. And so then I went to work for CIMMYT, which is a World Bank agricultural research center. And I felt way more at home. I sort of felt the same vibes as when I worked at CDC/WHO. And so moving to Mexico City was one of the best decisions I ever made. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. I was there for almost 4 years.
Okay.
So that's actually when we met, is when I was living in Mexico full time. But because my son actually stayed back in Atlanta, that's why I was coming.
Okay. So you was coming back to Atlanta a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And that's where we connected. So I got to interject here, because I got to tell this story to my listeners. So met Cherae, we hit it off, became buddies. Later during the year, we stayed in contact. I got this random email saying that invitation to a trip free of charge to Africa, Equatorial Guinea. And I was like, nah, this is the time where I was an accountant at the time for a nonprofit, and this was during our audit season. So this is the middle of an audit. Anyone who's an accountant know how much work that is. I have to figure out a way how to get on this trip. So I begged my boss to let me go, and I promised her that I'll work 10 times harder or overtime to make sure I make up for the week that I was gone. That was one of the best decisions I ever made, because the trip was amazing, Cherae. And I want to thank you for, including me on this invitation list. So
No problem.
how did that come about? How did you get the position to like invite all these amazing dynamic influencers and celebrities free of charge to a conference in Africa? How did that happen?
It's so funny because I, at the time, couldn't even have told you what an influencer was. Like, that's how far removed from those things I was. I mean, I was an agriculture nerd living on a research in Mexico. So I knew nothing about sort of, influencers, or like, I just had no clue about any of those things at all. But what I did have was like actual legit work experience, something that I feel like is underrated these days.
Right.
But because I was already working in Africa, and because I was specifically working in agriculture, the conference was put on by one of my really close friends, Vanessa Masters, her stepmom's foundation.
Okay.
Honoring the late Leon Sullivan, who was the first African American to sit on a Fortune 500 board in America. He also started U.S. divestment from South Africa during apartheid. So her father was like this amazing beacon of Pan-Africanism, but also African Americans doing business in Africa. And so he had this amazing legacy. She was carrying it forward via this foundation in his name. They were doing these elaborate summits biannually in Africa, and then in DC. They were really the only Black organization that was doing things that were at the same level of these sort of well-funded, wealthy, white-run organizations that were sort of Friends of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conference chair was the former president of Ghana, John Kufuor, and he wanted the conference to center around agriculture as a diversification strategy for African nations who had found oil. So Equatorial Guinea, super small, speak Spanish, but they have oil. And so they've been really wealthy from the profits from that as an individual ruling family. But as a nation, sort of leapfrogging development-wise, because they found oil like in the last, 2 decades.
Right.
So all that to say, they had to find, a former president is not going to do the work of putting together a conference. And so Vanessa told her dad and her stepmom, like, my friend Cherae works in agriculture for the World Bank. Like, she could totally pull the speakers together. She could do all that stuff. We should just hire her as a consultant. So they did. They hired me as a consultant. And because this was my friend, I spent a lot of time at their house, around her parents, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, one day we were talking, and they were just kind of like, we need more young people. Like, people are aging out in the foundation. We need new energy. There's this Afropolitan thing sort of happening. And, and so my friend Vanessa was like, well, Cherae knows people. And it really was just from my college network. So it wasn't that I, like, legit was, like, a well-known person. Like, I pledged in college, and all of the stuff I did in college meant I had some network of people. Mm-hmm. And so what I really did was just invite my personal network. And I didn't look at it like I was inviting influencers. Like, that hadn't even registered to me.
I don't know if there was a term called influencers at the time. This was like 2013, around that time.
What really happened was I invited people I knew directly in my network because they were my friends.
Wow.
So I invited
you had an amazing network, because there was some dope people on that trip.
And then what happened was I invited them, and then they would like tell someone they knew. And then I'd start having people like Lovey Ajayi emailing like, hey, I want to be a part of it. Or someone saying like, oh, I have this friend that's a great writer, and this person should be a part of what you're doing. And it was funny because to me, I wasn't doing anything. Like, I was just like helping my friends' parents with their conference.
Listen,
and so I didn't even look at it like this big thing.
That experience never comes up. So that was amazing. You didn't realize the power you had at the time, because you were, important in bringing all these amazing dynamic people from all over the country, by the way, not just New York, from Chicago, from Atlanta. I think from
Yeah.
Cali all over the place. And it was like,
Yeah, Detroit. I mean, people are now like whole House of Representatives members, and
yeah, that's
I mean,
right.
it was amazing. I mean, it was, it basically like once. I mean, what happened was I started getting all these recommendations, and then I stepped back and was like, I mean, I knew initially not to just invite like my personal friends. I mean, that's how you got invited. You weren't necessarily like in my, immediate circle, but I was like, all right, I've got this opportunity. Like, who in my network should I extend it to that will make the most of it? And that was my mindset inherently. Like, it was just like, I could have just invited my 50 homegirls.
Right.
But I was like, I just sort of knew that, like, being that for me, Africa and sort of creating a new and modern narrative was core to my being. And at the time, I was living in Mexico, but I was traveling like 70% of the time, largely to the African continent and to some degree, India, Bangladesh, Nepal. So for me, it was like, oh, this is an opportunity to show the Africa I know to as many people as I can that will take it and do something with it.
Right.
And I definitely, like, till this day, when I look at what people on that trip have done with it, I accomplished my goal.
Right.
So even though I didn't necessarily take it and build it into some big thing, the Summit Series of Africa or whatever people wanted me to build it to, like, the goal I had for myself has been accomplished like 100-fold.
Right. Well, I'm still proud to be an Afropolitan.
Yeah. Before, like, it was a party in New
Right.
York City.
That's right.
Like,
yeah. I thought you came up
way
with that name.
before any of this.
Right.
Yeah, way before any of that. Yep.
So let's talk about TasteMakers Africa. How did that idea come about in terms of starting this experience marketplace company?
How did it come about? It was a couple of things. I mean, Afropolitans was definitely in many ways like a precursor. So doing that trip, realizing that there was this huge appetite for a different sort of African experience, and also realizing the power that happens when interesting and dynamic people come together. I sort of wanted to be able to do that again and again and again and again.
Wow.
And
so that kind of came about like accidentally, right? It's not something that you meant to do. It's just something that, that an opportunity came. You were just creating as you go along. And
I think an opportunity came and then I turned it into something else. So like the foundation would have been fine for me to just bring whoever I knew. I, as Cherae Robinson, knew that I had to make it mean something. So the opportunity came, definitely wasn't expecting that. But in terms of what I did with the opportunity, I had to like have a bit of foresight around it.
Oh, that's dope. Okay, so it was the Afropolitan was like the.
Yeah, that was definitely a seed. And I think bigger than like from a structure perspective, it was also just the first time I had ever done anything independently. So I had decidedly been like an employee at these big, bureaucratic, but like prestigious organizations, the World Bank, the CDC, CARE. Like, I liked saying that I worked at the World Bank. I liked saying that I worked at CARE. Like, they held weight, especially in the communities that were important to me. And so for me, that was sort of where all of my, for lack of a better term, sort of professional stock was placed in that. So the fact that I could do something in many ways on my own and sort of create something had never really occurred to me. Like, it never been something I thought I could do. So I think, if nothing else, Afropolitan showed me what I could do in just executing my own vision and like just sort of. And so that, and then the fact that I was, by this point, I mean, after Afropolitans, I was still in Africa all the time for work. And so a turning point for me, well, there was kind of two. One was in Nairobi. I went to Nairobi for the first time. And my advisor to my collegiate Delta chapter, she was like, oh, you got to meet Tawana. I remember when you were online, I had mentioned this to you. And she's like the 20 years ahead of you version of you, and you got to meet her, you got to meet her, you got to meet her.
Uh-huh.
So one of my chapter sorors was in Nairobi at the same time as me. We had never met, but had been told about each other. And she was working on this MTV program called Sugar. It was a series that MTV did in Africa. And so I met up with her, and she was like, oh, you got to meet the young people that I work with. They're amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that night we went out for cocktails, and I met them. And they were some of the most incredible people I'd ever met in my life. I mean, Kimasi, at that time, Jay-Z had worn his fashion line at Live 8 in Philly, and Wanuri had just come back from the Cannes Film Festival. So, I mean, these were like young people my age, but like they were not thinking about working for some NGO or getting a job. Like they were like creating their universe from Africa, like from Nairobi. So I ended up seeing Nairobi through their eyes. And so I was on rooftops and just doing everything. And now Instagram had come out by now. So I started sharing some of my travels there. And the same thing happened. Like everywhere I went to Johannesburg, and my original co-founder, Stephanie O'Connor, she was a photographer from Brooklyn, but living in Johannesburg. And same thing. Like I met Stephanie for the first time. We kicked it at some advertising agency party in Johannesburg, just worlds that I didn't even know about in New York, because I don't come from that kind of world at all,
right?
Let alone know it in Africa. And so my African experiences just were, completely different than everything the media was sharing. And so I kind of became a de facto expert, via Instagram, via Facebook. And so people would just be like, how do I go to Africa like that? And then Afropolitans came and sort of took that and amplified it through those 80 people. And so I sort of got this reputation as the like dope, sexy, cool Africa plug. Like that became my thing.
Wow.
And I was like, this is a business. Like there's something to this.
Uh-huh.
And so the early iterations of TasteMakers, when we were doing like group trips and Instagram, before we became a full tech platform like we are now, like really was birthed from those experiences.
Mm-hmm. So now you have this vision, and now you want to form this business. How were you able to take, that idea and vision and turn it into a business, TasteMakers Africa, in terms of it becoming, entity on its own and you running it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. It's not a glorious story of like me deciding to take a leap. I first called it Rare Customs, and a consulting firm. So I spent like
Say
almost
that again.
a year.
I'm sorry, you just tapped out for some reason.
I was saying it wasn't like a glorious story of me like making a decision to take the leap. It like definitely wasn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
I first started it as a consulting firm, and I thought that I could like convince tourism boards to let me like do their tourism strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely didn't work. I had no credentials in tourism. So like I spent like a few $100s on really nice printed out presentations and went like door to door at consulates and embassies, only to like never get a call back. So that was pretty funny. I did that for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I started thinking about doing it as an app. And so what happened was I knew graphic design. Like it was like a hobby I had. Like even when I lived in Atlanta, I had like a side hustle doing like marketing for restaurants just because I like Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
And so I designed the first mock-up of the app myself.
Okay.
And I'm just like a really good Googler. So a couple of things happened. I got introduced to a friend of mine who's also an entrepreneur called Janine Housif, who had started something called the Around the Way app to like get Black businesses on an app.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew she had built an app. So like I met with her and asked her the same question you asked me, like, how did you start? And she said she drew it out on paper and then found a designer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, I can do one better than that because I am a designer.
Right.
So I like took it the next step. I reached out to like a bunch of different dev shops and engineering shops to see like how much it would cost to like build it, because clearly I didn't know how to code, and learning the code just didn't seem like what I wanted to do, though in retrospect I probably should have.
Right.
But anyway, this one guy was like, you don't have enough money to build this, but what I will do is like put this into like a fake app that makes it look like you have an app so that you can get investors. And so this guy that I didn't know in Austin, Texas, literally compiled my Photoshop app mock-up into something that looked like and functioned like a prototype. And so that's how I got my first prototype. He sent it to me. He bundled it with an icon and sent it to me. And then I went to the Africa Policy Forum in D.C. and met my first advisor to my startup. I wasn't even calling it a startup yet. I just knew I was trying to build something. And so I met this guy, John Gossier, who's now an investor in TasteMakers. And he was like, I think you're onto something. We need something like this. I travel in Africa all the time. He actually started 3 of the first accelerator incubators in Africa, period. And so he talked to me 2 weeks later and was like, well, do you have advisors for your business? I was like, I don't even have a business. I just have this thing on my phone. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And so John was like, all right, I'm going to be an advisor. This is the agreement we should sign. Da-da-da-da-da. I don't know what I was doing. I ended up like offering like 2% of my company, which was like an epic fail in retrospect. But I did it. And John, introduced me to the world of startups. And I got a couple more advisors. And then a good friend of mine who was on the trip to Equatorial Guinea actually sent me the link for a startup competition in Nigeria called Cheraes Africa. And so I applied to that with my rinky-dink, fake app on my phone and a PowerPoint presentation. And by that time, I had posted a trip to Ghana for sale on my personal Facebook, and it had like sold out in a couple weeks.
Wow.
And so I had sort of proof of concept from that.
Right.
And went to Lagos in 2014 and won the competition with this like rare customs app for traveling in Africa called TasteMakers. The business wasn't even called TasteMakers, still called Rare Customs. And went to Lagos, won the competition.
What did you win?
I won $10,000 and a crazy amount of press coverage. Like ended up on Forbes, and the UN Foundation named me like a emerging woman entrepreneur to watch. Like 2015 was like insane from a press.
This was with your fake app.
With my fake app that didn't work. So I used the money to hire a developer, which was a fail because I definitely didn't know what to look for in a developer and wasn't smart enough to ask more questions of my advisors. So that $10K quickly went down the drain.
What did you do after?
Cheraes Africa had given me enough visibility that I was now getting outreach from investors. So
people now reaching out to you to invest. Yeah. People are basically, or Cheraes Africa would be like, hey, we ran into this investor that wants to support our program. We, as the winner, you're basically like the spokesperson. So Cheraes Africa was like pivotal to my success. Like Yasmin and Afua have and continue to be angels to me, both at a personal level and a business level. And Cheraes Africa was by far, in the course and the history of Tastemakers, probably one of the most pivotal moments is winning that. Wow.
So I ended up, closing my first investor, a guy called Pule Takobong out of South Africa. He's based in Johannesburg. I flew to Johannesburg to meet with him, closed him. And then, crazy enough, a guy I used to date who lived in Baltimore, introduced me to his friend who was a news anchor on Fox, or like a news reporter on Fox in New York, who then told me she had a friend in D.C. that she thought I should talk to. So I'm like, and she didn't really give me context. She just said, he's done a lot of stuff in Africa. I think he'd love what you're doing. I said, okay. Next thing you know, I get on the phone And he was like, you don't know me, but I know exactly who you are. And I was
Wow.
like, that's weird. And he was like, yeah, you're the person that had those 80 lit people on the plane with us to Equatorial Guinea.
Are you serious?
So my second big investor was on the plane with us to Equatorial Guinea.
We were rowdy. That was like so plain.
It was so plain. It was like Sophister Ratchet before that was a word, like for sure.
Oh my God.
But yeah, he was on the plane. And he remembered who I was. He remembered that I led the group. He remembered me throughout the time. And so within a few weeks, I got my second investor. So I raised $100,000.
$100,000 off a fake app.
Yeah. I mean, I still didn't have.
Were you doing this full time, by the way? Were you,
By that time, yeah, because I got fired from my job. So I had left Mexico. I had moved to New York. I took a job working for Alicia Keys' Keep a Child Alive Foundation. I did not like it and didn't do a good job of hiding that I didn't like it. So like literally 6 weeks after moving to New York, I got fired from my job and then wasn't eligible for unemployment because I had lived outside of the U.S. for almost 4 years. So I was like, new relationship, everything's great, and then everything like crashes. It was so crazy. So I don't even know what I was like doing like random stuff for people, building websites, like whatever I could do to like pay my half of the rent.
Right.
For like a solid 6 months because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was.
And this is before you got the investment,
Yeah, this is before the investment, so all that stuff's happening. So then, as I realized that I want to build TasteMakers as a tech startup, at some point I decided I want to work for a startup. So I ended up taking a sales job at like a healthcare startup in New York, and so I worked there. And then a year to the day of getting fired from Keep a Child Alive. A VC invests in the healthcare startup, fires the CEO, well, basically moves the CEO to Australia, and I sort of go to, as collateral damage, someone who was close to the CEO.
Wow.
So, like, literally a year to the day. And so then was my moment of, like, I'm not doing this anymore. So I stopped applying for jobs and went super hard. So I think that was July of 2014, and by September of 2014, I had won Cheraes Africa. Or 2 months later.
Wow.
So then 2015 was when I closed the 100K and was able to focus on TasteMakers full time.
Okay.
From 2015.
So how did things go from there now that you have two invested, 100K, and you have somewhat of an idea where you wanted to take this business? What did you do now that you had, a level of comfort, at least financially anyway?
To some degree. I was able to pay my bills, but I was still bleeding money. I had to pay developers because I wasn't an engineer. So I did a couple things. I built the first version of the website myself. So I sort of kept pouring money into, I think I spent probably 70% of that money on horrible outsourced development shops. I, used a guy in Kenya. That was like $30K down the drain. Then I had a recommendation from one of the investors to use a shop in DC. And that was like another $40K down the drain.
Wow.
They couldn't get what we needed. So like I literally just bled cash. Like it was horrible. And the only thing that was keeping us afloat were these group trips that we were doing, which wasn't even my core business, which also meant I was super distracted. So I wasn't even like the app was something I was trying to do, but it was like I had to do these trips to make some money because I was bleeding capital trying to build the app.
Right.
And the trips take time. Managing group trips, everybody with an Instagram account wants to like do group trips now, but like it's a beast.
Right.
Like,
how many people you would have on these trips?
Usually anywhere from 10 to 15 people on the trips. And so, that business grew. We did like 200K in 2015.
Wow.
300K in 2016.
Just by doing trips.
Yeah, but not in profit.
Right.
I mean, you're also,
Operation
I
costs.
mean, cost of fulfillment is like, and I wasn't financially savvy, so I wasn't doing things like negotiating better rates with hotels. I was literally like booking on hotels.com. Like
Wow.
I just didn't know better. Like
Wow.
I just didn't know better. I didn't know anything. I wasn't getting sponsors, and then we were doing like events at Soho House and this and that to try to like build brand awareness and.
Which I think you did an amazing job doing, though, building brand awareness.
Yeah. It was good. It was good, but it definitely didn't always contribute to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
At least I didn't have the structure in place to like really make a proper like sales cycle out of it. I didn't even know what a sales cycle was.
Right.
So there was just, it was just a lot. So that was like 2015 and through most of 2016. And by the end of 2016, I was burned out. I had lost my co-founders. I had lost like our first early employee. Didn't really like have a team. Couldn't figure out what to do. And on New Year's Eve, my relationship with my long-term partner ended.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, our trip we had in Ghana like went to complete shit. Like it just went to complete shit. And it was horrible. The end of 2016 was like probably some of the darkest days of my business. Like it was just horrible. Getting blasted in a big Facebook group, drags all over the internet.
Wow.
And black people have no chill. White people can make mistakes in their business, and it's like, oh, Jim, give him another $1 million. He'll, get customer service better.
Right.
Black people, and inherently it's also because we are also taking bigger risks with our smaller pool of money.
Mm-hmm.
They are going to go in.
Right.
And they did. It got to the point where I had to like stop reading the comments because people were like going so far, like making memes.
Wow.
It was one of the most hurtful experiences of my life.
Was it attacking you
horrible.
or was it attacking TasteMakers Africa?
Me. It was personal.
Oh, wow.
People had, I'm the founder of TasteMakers.
Right.
And so, when you become a CEO of a business, unless you're really sleuthy, like it's you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, people, it was, thousands of comments. And the head of that Facebook group, who I thought was like my friend, ends up like putting it on her personal page, like
wow.
for more people to see. It was just crazy. Like I had never in my like adult, now I'm in control of my life, experienced anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, there was a lot building up to that moment, a lot of opportunities where I could have sort of done things differently and just was overwhelmed and really didn't know how to like backpedal or backtrack, or I just didn't know and sort of was running my business on a hope and a prayer,
mm-hmm.
which left us open, to risk.
Right.
And so, that's what happened. And so shit hit the fan. And that was December bleeding into January of 2017. It was very, very rough.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't look good. We had to issue all kinds of refunds. We had no more money in the bank. I couldn't pay my rent. I was like, it was just, I didn't know what I was going to do. And
what did you do?
I called my landlord and I was like, I'm not going to be able to pay rent. Can you tell me when you're going to evict me?
Wow.
That's literally what I said.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to be able to see, like, at what point was I going to have to, like, move in with my family somewhere.
Right.
Like, I wanted to know. Like, I knew New York, it takes a long time to be evicted.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, can you just give me a realistic estimate so that I can, like, move my life accordingly?
Right.
And turns out my landlord was a venture capital lawyer. So he knew all about startups and tech and founders and da-da-da-da-da.
Uh-huh.
And so he basically was like, well, do you have investors in the pipeline? And I was like, well, I'm looking for them. And he was like, well, if you have an investor in the pipeline, you can stay through the end of your lease. Just actually pay me all my money when you close the investor.
Wow.
And so I was like, all right. So I knew I had to get an investor because I had to be able to pay my landlord.
Is that what kept the business going?
Not having to pay rent. Yeah. Because I basically like I thank God for like my Brooklyn friends and family, basically. I mean, my Brooklyn friends were family. Like we would eat dinner at friends' houses so that like I didn't have to buy so much food. Like me and my son. My son and I.
Oh, wow. I was about to ask you
Yeah,
about
because
that.
now it's just him and I.
Right.
So I'm like running on fumes, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul. But now at least I have this sort of rent thing. So we were living very, very, very minimal, like very minimal for most of 2017.
Wow.
And then one of my advisors, a woman called by the name of Cherae Robinson, introduced me to a contact she had met at Microsoft, who then introduced me to his best friend, who is one of the co-founders of Sundial, which, you know, owned Shea Moisture.
Right.
And Nima, so not Rich Lou, who like everybody knows in the news, but Nima, his co-founder of that company, ended up investing $250,000 into TasteMakers so that I could pivot the business to this tech-driven marketplace.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. This is why I have this podcast. Your story is amazing. It's very amazing. I didn't know all this. You were chilling.
Nobody really.
We used to hang, you know, I used to see you on every now and then on the train. We used to, you know, chop it up, but not really talk, you know what I'm saying? So
no.
You kept it cool, girl.
Yeah. I mean, my very, very, like my best friend Inez and a few other people sort of knew the nitty gritty. But I mean, it also was like, my friend Claire, who also runs an amazing travel company called Up in the Air Life. I mean, she paid my rent. Like,
wow.
You know, my friends were, I mean, and my family. I mean, my family was super supportive, you know, in the best way they could be. So I was just really, really fortunate to have sort of the right set of circumstances and the willingness to keep pushing, because most people probably would have gotten a job.
Oh, yeah.
And I somehow knew that wasn't an option,
right?
Which was either crazy or inspired or probably both. I don't know. But so
it's dope.
Got that investor. And
so where's TasteMakers Africa now, you know, in terms of, you know, the business and, you know, what is it now?
So it's very similar to Airbnb in that, you know, you go on our platform and you're not just booking like a 10-day trip that leaves in December. You're booking an experience with a local creative entrepreneur. So the idea for us here is to connect people to young African creatives and entrepreneurs so that they can share a collective experience together. So, you know, the idea sort of beyond that is really to like change the way we think about travel and change the way we think about like locals versus visitors, and really to create employment opportunities for young people in Africa so that they can stay focused on what they're passionate about. So you've got DJs hosting nightlife tours on our platform. You've got artists doing studio visits. You've got chefs doing, you know, traditional pop-up dinners. I mean, you name it, and it's on our platform. And so we've built, you know, this incredible community of hosts across Accra, Johannesburg, and Cape Town that are just really, really dynamic people. And it's one-of-a-kind, unique things that you can't find anywhere else. And most experiences are, you know, anywhere between 2 and 8 hours. So these are a la carte. People are going on TasteMakersAfrica.com. Oh, they already know they're going to Ghana for a week in October, and they're going and booking these experiences with these locals. So it's kind of like a DIY trip building. And we also, you know, give hotel recommendations and stuff like that. But the core of our business is authentic connections between people in Africa, making it happen in their cities, and the rest of the world. Like, that's the core of who we are.
Wow. That's like, I don't hear of anybody who's doing what you're doing with Tastemakers, in terms of like connecting entrepreneurs, travel, you know, all that dopeness in one via, I guess, tech, with a tech platform.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's I mean, when I thought about Afropolitans, when I thought about the early days of Tastemakers, I realized that my superpower, my friend Brian actually coined this, so I have to give him credit, but my superpower is being a convener. And so I was like, well, I've got all this African knowledge. I'm a convener. I'm a nerd. Like, how do these things all sort of live together in one place? And so I think as crazy as the journey was, I mean, it's definitely not the like smooth startup journey that people celebrate.
It's real though. That's exactly what I wanted you to share, the realness of being an entrepreneur and how you were able to keep it going. I think you did all that.
Yeah, I mean, it was by hook or by crook. And I mean, even still, even after the 250K, I mean, there was still like the way I thought we had to launch a market, spent a lot of money. It was wrong. Had to figure out how to come back from that. That investor, I mean, Nima invested another 150K after the 250. So this is one individual man.
Wow.
Black man.
Wow.
From Liberia invested 400K in my business.
Wow.
And then from there, we went to booking.com, which is the largest online travel company in the world, accepted us into their accelerator. I was the first Black woman to be accepted into that. And then we became VC backed just this past October. So Precursor Ventures, led by Charles Hudson, who's been called, the smartest early stage VC in the game, period. Not just like the smartest Black one, but like the smartest investor in the game. He backed us. And so they invested 400K. So now, we're a venture-backed company that has raised, almost $1 million over the past 4 years, which is what most companies raise to get them through 18 months. And now we're, in a new era. I went from literally 3.5 years of horrible
trial and error experiences,
partners, trial and error, everything, to now, having a CTO who's amazing and based in New York. I mean, our team just ballooned to 7 people, and we're distributed across the world, and they're amazing. And we've driven this year alone, we've driven almost $100,000 into the hands of young people in African cities.
Wow.
That are hosting experiences on our platform. So now we're growing. We're growing every day. We're about to expand into Nairobi next month. Looking at being in 10 cities by the end of 2019, and still sort of socializing the new model. Because a lot of people, know us as a trips company or maybe know us from Instagram, but it's really now about, getting to exponential growth and really getting people to also be fearless in how they travel Africa and be willing to do more than just go on a group trip, and to be willing to sort of be more dynamic in the types of experiences they want to do. There's more to Ghana than the slave castles. There's more to Nairobi than the, Giraffe Center. There's more to Johannesburg than Mandela's house. And so really socializing that and telling those stories, and the stories of the people on our platform, in a way that really inspires people to see Africa differently. That's really what we're focused on.
Right. So how do you feel going through all that to be where you are now? How do you feel in terms of, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel anxious? How do you feel? Are you happy?
How do I feel? I had a bit of a meltdown at the end of 2018, and I don't even think I really realized it, but it started building sort of, I think, in October, when I really reflect on how I was feeling, and it was horrible. I mean, I definitely went through like a very dark phase at the end of last year, just having done this for 4 years, and sort of, some days feeling excited about what I'm doing, other days feeling like, how has it taken me 4 years just to get to this point? Obviously looking left and looking right, and, not always running my own race, but, just all of these kind of things. I was really struggling, even into the beginning of this year, like even into January. I was just sort of on pins and needles, and just struggling so much so that like I went to Brazil to visit my like fiance and like had like a breakdown. Like I just couldn't, like I just, last end of December I was struggling, like tears every day. Well into February I was just really struggling and ended up, losing my fiance just because I couldn't manage.
Wow.
I couldn't, it was really, really rough. And then I came back to New York from Brazil and I did the Landmark Forum and it changed my life, like literally a week ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Did Landmark Forum, completely changed my life. And I'm generally like thrilled. But I think, people don't talk about how dark being an entrepreneur is. People talk about, oh my gosh, I raised $1 million, but the weight of what it feels like to have people put, especially your early investors, because they're putting their own cash.
Right.
VCs are putting in someone else's cash.
Right.
But to have like a Black man give me $400,000 for something I believe in,
right. That's big. That's big.
Like it's huge, but it is
the
scary.
pressure. The pressure is
scary.
on.
It's scary.
Right.
And then, I'm realizing I've been unsettled for the better part of 4 years, ended sort of my long-term relationship and got into a new one and facing difficulties just because I'm like, basically depressed, and just dealing with the ups and downs and teams and growth and managing, and also like the sticky issues of being African American, doing business in Africa. I mean, it is just, you name it, it's happened in the course of building this business. And so it was really, really muddy for a while. And, Landmark Forum was pivotal in sort of an examination of self and a stillness that I had not created for myself or taken since starting this business. And it really enabled me to sort of look at my narrative a lot differently, look at integrity as like a core value, and really just reset. And, amazing things have happened for me since that experience. I guess really now 2 weeks ago, I guess. And it's just been incredible. And so I think, TasteMakers is in a really solid position. We have an amazing team ahead of us. I, as a CEO, am both at a personal level and at a skill level. I mean, I just started my own, I just built my personal website like 2 days ago. And
okay.
It's not even like launched and live yet, but one of the things I really wanted to do was launch a newsletter to share some of these stories and to share some of the tools and things I use to sort of keep pushing, because like ultimately, like this whole journey has been about breaking eggs. You can't make an omelet without doing that. And so, TasteMakers is my omelet, basically.
Right.
And, I'm excited about, where things are headed. Our numbers look great. Our team is crushing it. They work, Sunday night, 50% of my team was up until like 3 a.m. in their respective time zones. And there's no overtime in startups. You know what I mean?
Right.
Great, venture investor going into another fundraise in the next few weeks to really, take things to another level. But we're on track, to drive $1 million into the hands of young African entrepreneurs in our cities by the end of 2019, and to create thousands and thousands of meaningful connections between them and travelers who want, an authentic, dope, inspired experience wherever they are in Africa. Like that's what we're on track to do just this year.
Wow. You've come a long way, Cherae. Wow. I kept on saying wow because I didn't know all this. You make it look so easy from the looking in from the outside, but I really appreciate you sharing this real raw journey with me. So what advice you think you would give any budding entrepreneurs Amy?
What advice? There's no such thing. I mean, a lot of people say like, oh, just jump out and do it. But I think one thing that doesn't get enough coverage is testing, right? And so, for example, I had some like evidence from Afropolitans on sort of the general vibe that people might want from a brand. But, when I reflect on it, I don't think I did enough testing of the product or what people wanted or sales funnels. And so I think that kind of stuff shouldn't be underestimated, nor should it be overcomplicated. So right now, today, we're running a survey at TasteMakers to understand like how people find out about the tours they book. And we're doing it like man on the street. Like we've got some university students and our team and Accra and Johannesburg literally going up to the places tourists go and one-to-one asking them the survey questions. And I think that stuff is not the sexy stuff that everybody likes to talk about.
Right.
But that data is like incredibly powerful, not in just how you build a product if you're looking at tech, but in also how you understand like your marketing cycle. I'm a biologist, so I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about sales. I knew nothing about brand building. I did everything myself. I did the design myself, our logo myself. I still run our Instagram. So I did all these things on my own. But, there's a wealth of strategy and sort of brand building and design that comes from research and testing that I just severely underestimated. And then I think the second one is like really just being clear and confident in what you're building and understanding that like the journey is the journey and like get really comfortable in that, right? So like we have seen at this stage, I mean, I'm 4 years in, I've literally seen so-called competitors come and go, in this time frame. And so I think it's really important that you are like laser focused on what you're doing and that you're unafraid to say no. There's a bunch of people that think Tastemakers should have gone this direction or that direction. But at the end of the day, like I have to be able to sit with where we are. I have to be able to look at that, especially in the low point. And so I can't under any circumstance be in that low moment and feeling like I did something because someone else thought I should do it. I've got to always have like conviction.
Right.
And so, that's taken a lot. There are people that felt like Tastemakers should only be for influencers and that's it. It felt like that should be what we do. And I didn't feel like that's what we should do. And so, it's just, you've got to really have conviction. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint at heart. It's not because it's cute or cool. That stuff will be dope when like your friend that works at Essence, does a write-up and now everyone thinks you got the juice. Right. But on those dark days when you're like looking at your kid who's like, why can't you stay in one place? Like that's not going to get you through those things at all.
So how does he feel about, travel, you're talking about your son. How did all this affect your son in any way?
I mean, it has not been smooth. I think when I was, living in Brooklyn and in the like 2-parent household situation, it was a lot easier for him because the impact of my travel wasn't felt. But like now when I travel, he's older, so my absence is felt more. We're not in the same environment. And he's also like, I mean, to him, I got divorced, so went from, so like, it's not even just the travel. It's like this separation in his life. He moved away from all his friends. And so, that part is rough. But then at the same time, my son is incredibly proud. I mean, we did a Black History Month presentation at his school that was like the wokest thing they ever saw. I mean, we were talking about Yoruba sculpture and the first African-American millionaires. And, so, he talks about my business to anyone who will listen.
Wow. He's so proud of his moms.
He's appointed himself the head of merchandise. He's, come up with a strategy for sales growth and merchandise, and he's 10.
Oh, wow.
So I think I take it as one of those like short-term sacrifice and long-term gain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also something that I've also learned from being in Africa all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In the U.S., we're super like hands-on with our kids, always worry about their feelings. And in Africa, you know, in Nigeria, kids are off at boarding school by 9.
Wow.
Like they're out of the house.
Figuring things out on their own.
Yeah, they might be in boarding school locally or in London or whatever. But then that's why when you look at these super successful people in Hollywood and business in America, a lot of them, I mean, Nigerians are the most well-off immigrant population in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so for me, I look at child rearing as a critical component of that.
Right.
You know, so with my son, you know, I think I've learned a lot from like the African parents that I know or my friends, you know, that are in Nigeria or Ghana or even in South Africa. You know, this idea of parenting that we have in the States is counterproductive to
Right.
creating humans that can sort. And I think, you know, Caribbean people have sort of similar elements of that, even if it's not as global as sort of some of the African folks that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like sweeping generalization. So whoever's listening that wants to make, you know, a diatribe, please feel free. I don't know. That's just sort of how I look at it. Like there are going to be things that he's not going to love. He's going to have some battles that some kids have, but he's also going to have, you know, some experiences that some people don't get their whole lifetime.
Right. Well, Cherae, thank you. I was only trying to talk to you for an hour, but your story was so great. We went up to like an hour and 20 minutes. So thank you so much for sharing this your amazing journey with us. And is there any last things you want to let our audience know in terms of?
No, I think I've talked them to death enough.
So it's TasteMakersAfrica.com to find.
TasteMakersAfrica.com.
Okay. Well, thank you once again. And I appreciate you coming on here, sharing your story. And I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, girl. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for tuning into Reverse Ambition Podcast. It is really a pleasure sharing these amazing journeys with you. It may take some time for you to find your purpose and realize your dreams, or for your purpose and dreams to find you. When it happens, don't be afraid to pursue them. Be more afraid if you don't. Trust God, trust your journey, and most important, trust yourself, and it will all work out. Until next time, I am Kelsey Cooper, the Social Broker. Thanks again for listening.